Hello and welcome back to another episode of the ShefF1 podcast off the back of a pretty underwhelming Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in Imola. We have no Lando Norris double after a very impressive Miami race weekend from him, although we got very, very close to beating Max Verstappen. Just needed a couple more laps at the end of the race, and that was the story of the race weekend, really. We thought we were going to get entertainment and excitement. We had loads of fun in all the practice sessions, a really unpredictable grid, but we didn't really have much to show for it in the race. It was just another one of those Max boring race wins. But there is a little bit to delve into here, I do promise. And I've got Seb and Amy here with me to go through all of the events that happened last weekend in Imola. Well, going into this race weekend, there were a lot of upgrades up and down the field, but it didn't really create too much sort of reorganisation of the pack. Red Bull, of course, arrived with upgrades going into the Friday, and then come Saturday, Perez failed to make it out of Q2. Seb, just talk us through that and what went wrong for Sergio Perez.
Yeah, I think it's just something we've seen before from Perez. Has a good start to the season, and then as we get into the European season, he just fumbles. I don't know what it is about him. I think we saw maybe last time out, obviously before Imola, maybe there were signs that he was starting to maybe not be as good as, the Perez of early season. And this weekend, definitely, obviously qualifying, getting knocked out in Q2, really, really poor. He obviously crashed in FP3. Maybe it was confidence that was that, he wasn't able to push fully in Q2 to get into Q3. And then in the race, obviously, he barely managed to make up any places, finishing P8. It was a somewhat solid race. I think he was on maybe a suboptimal strategy. And it all led to, just a really underwhelming weekend for Perez. And it comes as there's been rumours that he's actually going to, Red Bull are offering him a new contract. And you're thinking, is that a bit too soon? Science is apparently off their radar. I don't know. It feels... And, Tsunoda's apparently, they're just not interested in promoting him at all. I don't know why they're, jumping the gun so early on Perez. Especially when he has weekends like this. It just seems a bit... And especially with, McLaren stepping up their game. I mean, Red Bull are going to have to be a bit wary when it comes to constructors if Perez keeps this up.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It was a really strong start to the season from Perez. We said this countless times over and over again on the podcast, saying, he's been surprisingly consistent. He's been that perfect number 2 driver for Max Verstappen and Red Bull's Constructors' Championship hopes. But yeah, this was the sort of the Perez of last season, I'd say, coming into play again, really poor in qualifying. And Amy, Red Bull now have a bit of a headache for their driver situation to partner Max Verstappen, and that's if he does stay at the team. There obviously are them rumours, of course, taken with a bit of pinch of salt, but them rumours that he could be off to Mercedes. Who would you, if you had to just promote someone right now, would you keep Sergio Perez, would you promote Tsunoda, Ricciardo? Who would be that sort of partner to Max Verstappen?
Yeah, so Tsunoda for me, I think in a way has to be chosen. I don't see why not. But I also do think he is the sort of driver to have a mistake in him. And that, may be a bit, I feel like Perez could be a bit more of a trusted individual, especially when they now have to start worrying about things like the constructors, because McLaren and Ferrari are getting them upgrades now, which are allowing them to compete with Red Bull, even with Max, and definitely surpassing, obviously, Sergio Perez. But for me, a driver that I would just... Maybe this isn't going to happen at all, but I'd love to see it, would be Sebastian Vettel. I mean, that would be something. But I just think, getting back into the sport, that, he'd only come back in if he was in a competitive car, and he certainly would be in a competitive car with Red Bull. And, yeah, just... love that partnership of Max and Seb. I feel like they're such similar world championships, such dominated seasons in when they won it, that I just love them together. But yeah, that would be my ideal pairing. But realistically, I think they should upgrade Tsunoda, and it should definitely not be Ricciardo. But I reckon I could see Ricciardo getting promoted just due to a lot of things like marketing, and maybe a promise Christian Horner has led him to believe.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's nice that you mentioned Seb there as well, because of that really touching tribute that he made to Ayrton Senna sort of at the start of the weekend, driving his old car around the track where, of course, about 30 years ago now he did lose his life. But it was a really, really nice sentiment from Seb there, and it was great to hear that car back on track again, that old McLaren. It was, really, really cool. But, we'll move away from that now. And definitely a headache from Red Bull's perspective. Now that Perez is starting to squander his chances a little bit, clearly showing that he isn't that perfect number 2 driver that he might have sort of perceived to be. But they do seem to be showing continued faith in him, like you said, Seb, offering that new contract, or rumoured to be offering that new contract, which could be a little bit premature. But we'll move away from Red Bull now and talk about McLaren. Now, of course, Lando Norris, new race winner in the Miami Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago, and was ever so close to doing it at Imola. And Amy, I mean, you must have been biting your nails, praying to every single possible god. What was going through your mind when Lando Norris was chasing down Max Verstappen for the win?
Well, I actually seen it before even the commentators even realised, mentioned it. And I seen, it dropped from 5 seconds to 4. And I was like, nah, surely, Max has just reached traffic or something. And then it just got slowly, and then there was 10 laps left to go. And Lando was incredible. He was just complaining literally the lap before and said, oh, I've got no pace whatsoever, Charles is about to catch me. And as soon as Charles came, he went flying, and it was just really impressive to be able to catch up to Matt. I am a little, maybe if he hadn't made them 2 mistakes in the final few laps where he just went slightly off, would he been able to catch him? Maybe. I think if we had 2 more laps left, I would like to say that he would have overtook Max, but I also think Max could have defended really well because it's Max Verstappen still at the end of the day. But yeah, it was just so impressive, and literally my shock prediction was a double win, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get points and my favourite driver's going to win, but no, it weren't meant to be.
Yeah, if only we had a couple more laps to see that battle unfold a little bit more. I mean, Imola, a circuit notoriously pretty difficult for overtaking around in terms of track purpose-built circuits. But Seb, I mean, was there anything that Norris or McLaren could have done differently to try and secure that top spot on the podium?
I don't think so. I think, obviously, you saw Norris. He was fighting so hard with the car. He was pushing everything he had. I think at the end of the day, Max, he's just so much more experienced in that position. He knows, when it's the tyres or the RS, he just knows what to do in that position now. He's been there so often. And I think that even if Norris had gotten, he got close, but even if he had been, putting on the pressure for a few more laps, I still think Max, he just knows what to do in that situation. And I think that ultimately, maybe the pace between the Red Bull and McLaren was very similar. But I think, this Max Verstappen, he knows what to do. So I think that no matter what McLaren had done there, and no matter what Norris had done, I still think the end result would have been the same.
Do you think it's hopeful for the rest of the season? That McLaren are a similar pace to Red Bull? Or do you think Red Bull are going to potentially sort out that, be able to go in the simulator for Monaco, and we're going to be able to see them going to be tenths of a second quicker now? Or do you think that this, Ferrari and McLaren are going to be able to, fight for wins like that?
I think they will. I think that obviously this weekend, Red Bull brought upgrades, and there's not really any signs that they're going to be bringing any more upgrades, huge upgrades in the future. I think they're on a very similar level playing field at the moment, and I think that they're both going to bring upgrades. And I think we are finally at the sort of stage where, with these regulations, we are going to be seeing fights for the win every weekend, sort of thing. Obviously, there'll be certain tracks that suit the Red Bull more than the McLaren, and then there will be circuits that suit the McLaren or the Ferrari more than the Red Bull. So I think Monaco is going to be really interesting, because I don't know who that's going to suit more. And obviously, it all comes down to qualifying there. If Norris gets on pole, then McLaren could be looking at their second win of the season. So I think from now on, Red Bull have got to be really wary about those behind them.
I mean, you did mention that, we are seeing sort of a more and more close fight, for the first time in this sort of period of regulation. It makes me so excited for 2025, thinking that, a lot of teams at that point will start to divert their attention to, the new regulations in 2026, but others may be, licking their lips at that opportunity and sort of taking advantage of, teams maybe slacking a little bit for next year. And, we could see a really close fight for the title next year between McLaren, between Ferrari, and, of course, Red Bull. But we'll talk about McLaren more in their rivalry with Ferrari at the moment. Going into this weekend, both teams bringing upgrades, of course. But I think we can all agree on the fact that McLaren just still look much quicker than Ferrari do, especially at Ferrari's one of their home races. It was it wasn't quite as convincing as we thought it would be, especially considering a bit of a lower speed track, and McLaren typically not performing too well round there in most sort of cases. But Amy, what went wrong with Ferrari? I mean, it wasn't a terrible race weekend, but where can they improve?
I mean, qualifying for me. I mean, to finish behind, if you're finishing behind the McLarens, I mean, obviously Oscar had to end up, due to the points, where the penalty, had to start behind Sainz. But there was just no way that Charles or Carlos was going to get back, in front of Lando. And the way that Oscar Piastri just stayed behind Carlos Sainz for God knows how many laps. He, even Carlos said on the radio, I couldn't shake him off. It just it's a dangerous thing. And then obviously the strategy for when they pitted, Oscar was perfect. McLaren went in at the right time, got out before Ocon, and he was able to get out there and have some free air. But Carlos, on the other hand, was stuck behind quite a few drivers, including Perez. Managed to get ahead of him, but I feel like Ferrari for so many years have just struggled on that sort of strategy, when to box the drivers. They try and get into other teams' heads, it feels like, and they kind of thought that they were forcing McLaren to pit, and realistically it was McLaren who benefited from that. And I just think Ferrari should be looking more so at themselves. They're always constantly looking at the drivers around them, which is what you need to do, but they do it more so and then end up benefiting the other driver instead of themselves. So I just think they should focus on themselves a bit more. But qualifying, which they have got with both drivers, especially Charles Leclerc, they can get ahead, especially at a track where it's hard to overtake. I reckon they have the pace to stay ahead. I definitely think and they've got the defensive skills, both drivers. So I just think, qualifying and maybe a bit of strategy from, the pit wall team.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a rivalry starting to brew. You mentioned sort of that battle between Piastri and Sainz. I mean, there's a bit of a rivalry starting to brew between the two of them. Look back to Miami as well. That got really heated on the radio after there was sort of, accusations of going off track to gain an advantage. And then, of course, the collision towards the end costing Oscar a potential top 4 finish. Seb, let's just talk about Carlos Sainz for a second here, because he had an electric start to this season, even, with his absences and stuff like that. But, last couple of races, we're not really seeing the same sort of driver. Just talk us through that.
I think we're just seeing actual Carlos Sainz. I think that he just had a flurry of good form at the start of the season. Maybe, Charles Leclerc just having a slow start to the season. And obviously, you can only compare him realistically to his teammate. I think that Carlos Sainz is on a similar level to the likes of Charles Leclerc, but he isn't quite as good. I think we all know that. And I think that ultimately, also when you're in a team where you're not really building for a future, obviously he has the the reasons to perform if he's trying to get a move to the likes of Mercedes or Red Bull. But I just think that it's natural with any driver. Every driver has ups and downs. I think he's just in a bit of a plateau at the moment, and I just think it's the Carlos Sainz that we've seen mostly for the last 3 or 4 years.
It's interesting you say that, though, because the car has sort of regressed a little bit. And as, the cars get slower for Sainz, the better he seems to do. You look at his first season for Ferrari in 2020, I want to say 1, but I've got a feeling I got that terribly wrong. No, I've not. No, yeah, it was 2021. That car was horrific. And Sainz was the better of the two drivers by quite a long way as well, picking up a podium in the final race of the season. And then, you look back to the sort of back end of last year. Okay, the car was pretty good by that point, but he was doing better than Charles. This was more than just a flurry of decent results. This was a driver that was in, it was more than just good form. I think we'd really seen this sort of new level of Carlos Sainz that had been unlocked. But no, I do agree with you. He has sort of fallen back into that sort of number 2 position of the two Ferrari drivers, because Leclerc started to pick it up again a bit now, and maybe the pressure of trying to secure a new deal with a different team is becoming a bit of an issue for him.
Yeah, but Charles has been so consistent. Every podium that you look at, Charles has constantly been there. So I kind of think I realised how big the points difference was in the constructors between Ferrari and McLaren. I didn't realise it was that big, but then when I thought about it, Charles has been there every single podium, and then Carlos, won a race, so it does make sense now when you think about it. But I think he's been overlooked this season, Charles Leclerc.
Are you concerned, Amy, for Carlos Sainz? Do you reckon this sort of, not poor form, but this sort of drop-off in his, amazing consistency and strong results, do you reckon this will be a sort of a permanent thing for the rest of the season?
Potentially. I mean, why would a top team like Red Bull or a Mercedes want driver number 2 at Ferrari? I mean, especially for Mercedes, they're giving their best driver, Lewis Hamilton, to Ferrari. Why would they take, I guess, sloppy seconds? Why would they take their second driver who isn't, even good enough to stay there? It would be stupid of them in a way. But I do think Carlos Sainz is a talent and he can be exceptional. I think he just needs to, I guess, pick up that form again. But I'm certainly, it is probably a bit disheartening when you're not going to be at that team for the rest of the season. I mean, he's going to be took away from chat soon about, the car for next year. And I feel like it will be disheartening mentally. But I think he needs to just find that form somewhere, because especially if he wants to see at the likes of, Mercedes or a Red Bull. But I do think, and I've always thought this, that he will go to maybe Sauber, when it's ready to be Audi, and I could potentially see the pairing of, Hulkenberg and Carlos Sainz. I think that definitely makes most sense to me. So I think maybe he doesn't have to pick up too much if he's happy to go somewhere like that and, work on a project, because at the end of the day, Sauber being kick, what they are now, would be so lucky to have a driver like Carlos Sainz. So maybe he doesn't have to try too much, but it depends where he wants to go, in my opinion.
Yeah, interesting. A reuniting of the Renault 2018 partnership. But, two very different drivers at this point in their careers. We'll talk about Nico Hulkenberg for a little bit because, every weekend we seem to be just saying something nice about him. And not quite the race that he would have wanted. He was pretty close. Well, not pretty close to the point. Well, he made it into Q3, I think. Or have I just made that up? Yeah, he made it into Q3. And, Seb, just talk us through that, because it was a very competitive midfield for that final points-paying position. We had drivers like Alonso in terrible form, and so that opened up some room for more competition. Yuki Tsunoda was the favourite to obviously finish 10th, or to finish sort of out of the best of all the midfield, and then he obviously did that. But, Nico Hulkenberg, it was a pretty strong weekend for him.
Yeah, I think it was another solid weekend for Haas. They just ultimately didn't have the pace of the likes of RB, obviously Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin, and I think it was the best that Nico Hulkenberg could have done. I think, again, outperforming Magnussen. Kind of difficult to see how good Magnussen would have been this weekend, obviously getting impeded in qualifying, so we couldn't quite see, because he, across the practice sessions, he did seem to have a bit of the measure on Hulkenberg for one of the first times this season, so it would have been interesting to see, if he had been able to get into Q2, could he maybe pushed it to beat Nico Hulkenberg to getting into Q3 maybe. That would have been interesting to see, because obviously Magnussen actually had a really good race, making his way up to P12 just behind Hulkenberg. But I mean, it was quite quiet because it was quite a big gap to the likes of Tsunoda and Stroll to actually get into the points. But yeah, either way, again, another solid weekend for them. And yeah, I think it's still promising signs for Haas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think Kevin Magnussen and Imola, you think back to that battle he had with Charles Leclerc a few years ago, where they were just side by side for pretty much the entire thing. But something less exciting and more sort of solid and reassuring, I think, was the result that Mercedes picked up. 6th and 7th for the team. Probably their most, not expected, but I think in terms of, they'd be happy with that. No, do you think? I mean, considering that teams were bringing stronger upgrades than them. Seb, if you were Toto Wolff right now, what would 6th and 7th mean to you?
I mean, it's good. It's better than other weekends where, they are quite far off the pace. They weren't a million miles off the pace, actually. Maybe 10 seconds back from the leading pack sort of thing. And obviously Russell had a pit stop at the end. Obviously ahead of Perez, that's obviously promising. It's still not great though, let's face it. They're a team that have won, numerous Constructors' Championships, numerous Drivers' Championships. They're still not where they want to be. But they are, expected to bring upgrades for every weekend up until Silverstone. So I think that, it's promising signs, but it's still nothing groundbreaking. They're still not going to be walking away thinking, yes, we had a really good weekend. They'll be thinking, yeah, we've had an okay weekend, I think.
Yeah, a decent result for Lewis Hamilton as well. I think when we look back to our Miami review, we were saying, if he can build on such a solid race weekend that he had over in America, that could be the start of what could be a redemption for Lewis Hamilton and the pretty poor start he's had to this season. And he did just that in Imola, finishing ahead of his teammate. Of course, Russell went and got fastest lap in the end, though, with that extra pit stop. But No, it was, Hamilton again didn't really put a foot wrong, and it was, nice to see that experience starting to show through a little bit, that immaturity going out the window. And Amy, have you got anything to add to Hamilton's performance?
Yeah, no, I kind of said it in our prediction video. I think there'll be a time where Hamilton, the sort of driver he is, he has to come through, and I feel like this could be his potential, what's the word? Like rebirth. Yeah. Sorry. Right, we'll do that again. Yeah, I just think I predicted this in the video, in our prediction video, that Lewis Hamilton, at one time or the other, sort of driver he is, he has to, have some sort of revival. And I feel like this was the race that he did it in. I think he's got to start showing, not like Ferrari was shaking their heads, but like, they know what sort of driver he is. However, he still wants to, leave Mercedes on a high, surely, after being with them for such a long time and winning so many championships with them. So yeah, I'm glad it's starting to maybe come together. I think it's going to be a long project, but I think it will come together for Mercedes. I mean, they aren't bad at building a car. The championships tell that all, so maybe they just need to sort it out a little.
So every race weekend we like to make predictions for what is going to happen, and we've got a leaderboard set up, and per category we get 1 point correct for each prediction, and at the end of the season we still haven't quite decided what the winner is going to get, or maybe what the loser is going to get, but we'll find out in due course. But we'll start off with who we all predicted to finish on pole position. Just one of us getting it correct this week. Amy and Seb, you both said Charles Leclerc. Do you want to both talk us through that?
Well, I think we just thought we thought the Ferrari upgrades were going to be better than they were. Ultimately, they weren't. And yeah, I think that in the end, we know Max Verstappen, even though they had struggles in practice sessions, he came through in the end. And yeah, I mean, obviously it looks a bit silly in hindsight not to predict Max, but I think we went out on a limb and it just didn't pay off.
I mean, it was potentially going to be another driver that weren't Max and that weren't Charles for once. I feel like on Saturday Charles does so well. I think he's the fastest over one lap. So he's always like, a little security thing, which isn't Max, I guess, if you want to go a bit different. But it was Oscar Piastri for me, who was like, it maybe if, Max didn't get that toe off, was it Hulkenberg? They predicted that Piastri could have potentially got pole position, and it was just obviously unlucky for him that he had a penalty. But I think he would have been the driver which was closest to getting pole over than Max, so definitely not Charles.
Yeah, top the timing sheets in FP3, I'm pretty sure Oscar Piastri did. 1 and 2 for McLaren there. And he's really starting to turn it up a little bit over one lap, Oscar Piastri. He's, it's what he needs to do to be able to be in that fight, especially with someone like Lando Norris, whose qualifying is really, really strong. But pole position for Max in the end. I'm going to get a point for that. But that doesn't necessarily mean he was the star of qualifying. And Amy, would you say your prediction of Oscar Piastri being the star of qualifying is the right one? Because we've all put semi-respectable out.
I think we've done really well this week. Here. What have you all put?
So I said Lando Norris.
I think Oscar should be...
I said Yuki Tsunoda.
See...
When I was going through this before, I was thinking, well, Piastri had the strongest performance, but at the end of the day, it was his fault that he impeded Magnussen. And
that's harsh. I mean, if we're looking at a quali position, who was the best? Who had the best quali out of them three?
Well, I think Norris.
He went faster.
But he didn't impede someone.
But that's a separate penalty. If we're looking at just qualifying, we're not looking at...
It happened in qualifying, didn't it?
Yeah, but we're not talking about a grid starting position. If we're looking at who got the fastest time...
I disagree, but...
I'm liking hearing Lando Norris being the strongest shout as that.
But I'd also say, obviously, then you could say, well, then Norris was, slower than his teammate, and then you could say Yuki Tsunoda had his best qualifying of the season, P7. I mean,
it's impressive, but I'm talking about P2. No, for Yuki.
Well, P5, isn't it actually?
Yeah, well, that was his grid starting position, but his qualifying, where did he qualify? He qualified in P2. which was ahead of.
I am sort of with Seb here because it's a case of, you can't really be the star in qualifying if you pick up a penalty during that session. Like it's such
a harsh penalty there. Like,
well, he was in the wrong.
Was it? It was a deserved penalty.
It's his first time with the new upgrades, and he goes and qualifies ahead of his teammate. And he was predicted if Max didn't get that toe, he would have gone and got pole position.
But he did.
It's all ifs and some buts.
Kevin Magnussen.
But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about his fastest lap, and it was the second fastest.
Yeah, but it's not the start of the fastest lap. It's start of qualifying. You've got to take into account that this is, how the drivers conduct themselves.
But the penalty was implemented for the race.
Yeah, but he earned the penalty. He deserved the penalty.
Nah, I don't agree.
Well, we're going to have to come to some sort of agreement. I mean, Tsunoda was, of course, excellent as well. There wasn't much between the two, him and his teammate, Daniel Ricciardo. But, best qualifying result of the season. It was something that we all expected, really, Tsunoda to do really well at this weekend. But, I mean...
I think it'd be stupid going for Lando if you're going for a driver who was out-qualified by his teammate.
But the margin was so small he was
out-qualified by his teammate.
Yeah, but then his teammate got a grid penalty. Look,
but he was out-qualified by his teammate.
I've got a feeling this is going to go back and forth for quite some time.
No, that's why I'm saying Yuki.
You're saying Yuki?
Yeah.
Okay, Seb, who are you saying?
Oh, so I'll go for my own prediction. I'll go for Tsunoda.
You can't go for your own prediction. If you got to pick one and it's not your own prediction.
Oh, well, it's Norris then.
Right, well, it doesn't matter for that anyway because I'm going to say Tsunoda as well. So Tsunoda earns the Start of Qualifying award, although all three of them really are worthy of points. Seb gets the point for that one. Moving on now, I think something that is a little bit easier to debate here, the flop of qualifying. Now, someone we were just talking about, Nico Hülkenberg. Seb, he was your prediction. What went wrong there for you?
Well, he just showed the pace he showed all season. I thought ultimately at some point it's going to come to an end. I've been basically saying this every predictions video, that I think at some point, surely this Haas, hype train's going to come to an end. It didn't. Hulkenberg, he did what he's always done, and he gets into Q3. And I think in Q3 he did have a very poor performance, but ultimately getting to Q3 in the Haas, there's not much more he could have done, even if he was on it in Q3. So it's definitely not Nico Hulkenberg the flop.
Yeah, I mean, I said Carlos Sainz. It'd be a bit unfair to call him a flop, really. I mean, there weren't enormous expectations, especially after the pace suggested by each of the practice sessions. And, I mean, it wasn't awful from him, really. P5, of course, P4 after Piastri's grid place penalty for impeding Magnussen. But, just nothing to write home about. And then, Amy, you did just get the correct answer of the whole session. Sergio Perez, flop of qualifying, failing to make it into Q3, of course, earning you the point for that one. I think we've spoken enough about Perez.
I mean, I just feel like Seb said it before, is like, there's always a time in the season where he does have a good start and then he just falls off, and I feel like I predicted it at the right race. I mean, it's normally about 6 races in, so it makes sense.
Yeah, well, enough about Perez said, the better, really, because we've just sort of not stopped talking about him this episode, but we'll move on to our podium predictions now. So we get 1 point each for each correct driver in each correct position. So we all got the point for Max Verstappen, and then that is where the points end. We got the race winner correct, and that was it. We all said Leclerc to finish P2 as well, which of course didn't happen. And then I had a howler and said Perez. Amy, you said Norris, and Seb, you said Sainz. Amy, I mean, yours was nearly correct. Just talk us through that.
I just thought, they're the top 3 teams at the minute, and they're their first drivers, and I think they were all going to be on the podium. Sadly, obviously, didn't get it the right way round with Norris and Leclerc. But when Leclerc was catching him, I was a bit like, oh, go on. I mean, I love them both, but I wanted some points, so I was going to get 3 points. But literally just the best drivers in the teams, and they're the best 3 teams at the minute, so pretty much a good prediction, but just not in the right places.
And so, Seb, what about your Carlos Sainz prediction? Sort of reassuring the statements that you've made this episode, saying that we're seeing a return to the old Carlos Sainz. Did you just think that Ferrari were going to be stronger than McLaren going into this weekend?
Yeah, and I think that was ultimately it. I thought that the upgrades would work. I mean, maybe they did. Obviously, they were quite close to McLaren, closer than they were before. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, they just didn't have the pace to make it a double podium.
Yeah, and then my prediction of Leclerc then Perez. I mean, I just sort of underestimated the upgrades brought by Ferrari and McLaren. I thought with Leclerc and his sort of not necessarily track record around Imola, but I just felt as though it all added up into something that would fall into a nice result for Charles Leclerc in the end. And that obviously did come into play, finishing P3 behind two very quick drivers with very quick cars in the form of Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, of course. But Perez was, of course, extremely disappointing. And so, yeah, just a point each for the race winner for all of us there. Now, moving on to our driver of the day predictions. Two of us with the correct answer, technically. And Seb, you said Lewis Hamilton. I mean, to be fair, not a terrible race from him, ahead of George Russell once again. How would he fare in comparison to the rest of the grid in terms of how he was performance-wise? Was he any good?
Yeah, he had a decent race. I think that obviously him finishing ahead of Russell, I think, is a bit, he wasn't the better driver this weekend. I think Russell was still, quicker on pace. It was a team decision in the end. There was the opportunity to get an extra point. Russell wasn't actually happy because he was ahead of Hamilton, and without the pit stop, he would have finished ahead of him and got more points. But for the team, he ultimately took the decision to get the fastest laps. So I do think it's a little bit, deceptive, but he still had a decent race. Obviously made up a place. Ended up being a couple of places, but realistically was only a place. It was an okay race, but it was definitely not anything special.
Yeah, and then, of course, Lando Norris won the fan vote. I think of the three predictions that we've made, Amy and I saying Tsunoda is a bit of a stronger shout than that. Finishing P10, and, going into Imola, this is a track where Tsunoda has been really, really strong round in the past, particularly in the race conditions. I remember there was this one battle he had, I think, a few years ago with, Sebastian Vettel and Aston Martin, and his defensive driving was just second to none. And I feel as though of course, Faenza is close to Imola, making it AlphaTauri's pretty much home, making it RB's home race pretty much. And, Tsunoda, of course, plenty of experience in an F1 car around there. It just makes a lot of sense as to why he is and why he has been so strong at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Amy, were you impressed with Tsunoda's performance?
Yeah, I mean, that overtake he had on Logan Sargent. I mean, it was on Logan Sargent, but that was beautiful. I mean, he just got it timed to perfection, and I think he might have won overtake of the race. I don't know. But for me, that was overtake of the race. I mean, he was just immense. Like, it's just really nice to see him not just having to defend these days, but the car he's in, he's allowing, he can attack. And even just with the likes of Lewis Hamilton, like being in a competition with him when he's in a Mercedes, it's almost a sure thing that Lewis is going to overtake, but he's just keeping them at bay, and it's so frustrating. If you're one of them big teams, a McLaren, a Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, and you get stuck behind an RB, and especially Yuki Tsunoda in an RB, that is not a good thing for that driver, because they're not getting past easily these days, which is fair dues to Yuki, because why should he just give up that place?
Yeah, this is certainly a refined Yuki Tsunoda that we're seeing this season. The most mature he's been, the best racecraft that we're seeing so far, and then of course his one-lap pace has been really, really strong too. Sort of making a bit of a mess of Daniel Ricciardo, to be fair, with the sort of exclusion of the Chinese Grand Prix. But of course there were upgrade differences there. Now, moving on to praising the drivers, let's talk about who the flop of the race weekend was, or just the race, in fact. Now, I think we can all unanimously agree that even though none of us put him down before the race weekend, it was Fernando Alonso. I mean, what on earth happened there? Seb, have you got anything to sort of say about that?
I think in obviously qualifying, he just got it wrong, just wasn't there for him. And then in the race, obviously, then starting from the pit lane, started on the soft tyre, tried to do something different, pitted early, and it just didn't work out for him. Wasn't able to make his way through the field, because actually that midfield is actually quite competitive, and the Aston Martin isn't miles quicker than them, that he can just cut through them. He's up against decent cars, and like even the Williams, the Alpine at this point, the RB. It's just too hard to actually make your way through the field unless you're in the likes of McLaren or Ferrari or a Red Bull. So he just wasn't able to make his way through the field, and I think it was all down to qualifying, especially being at Imola where it's so hard to overtake. It just ruined his race qualifying, I think.
Yeah, we'll say a little bit less about your flop prediction in the form of Lando Norris, who was excellent this weekend. But we'll talk about and sort of start a little, maybe less of an interesting debate here between Bottas and Albon as the flop of the weekend. I said Bottas, Amy said Albon. Two drivers that really are looking for some sort of glimmers of hope this season. But Bottas outperformed by Zhou Guanyu in the race, even though, this season he's probably been the stronger of the two drivers. Again, very hard to measure considering how subpar that Sauber kick state car is. And then Alex Albon, another weekend to forget, but in the form of a very strange retirement, Amy. I mean, what can you remember from that?
I mean, for Albon, it's like I chose him because I thought he had some expectation on him this week, obviously signing that contract for 2 years at Williams. I feel like just even finishing the race for him was a good thing, and obviously he didn't go and do that. I mean, it was pretty much a practice session from that race. He had like 5 pit stops, and eventually they said retire the car. But for him, I think it's so hard. This is why I think it's so harsh to say to Logan Sargent, you're out the team, you've only got a few races left, when he actually is technically outperforming his teammate in a few of these races this season so far, because Alex literally hasn't even been finishing them. And I just think it's really harsh to say to Logan when their star driver, Alex Albon, can't even finish a race. And I think that's why, a bit of expectation on him this week and he didn't live up to it.
Yeah, made it into Q2, but that was the only real highlight for Albon, really. The car just sort of fell apart, quite literally, come Sunday. And, you're spot on, really. It does seem like there is this unfair treatment. If this was the Albon that we saw last season and the season before that, then of course, Logan Sargent, Formula 1 career dead and buried. But no, this is an Alex Albon who is underperforming, and Alex Albon yet to score a point this season. Of course, that Williams car as well does look a little less competitive in that sort of lower end of the midfield. That we saw plenty of times last season where it was one of the strongest cars, particularly around that sort of random one-lap pace that it had. We saw Albon and Sargent, entering Q2 a fair bit, but we aren't really seeing that again this year from Williams. But then I said Valtteri Bottas. I mean, does anyone really care who the bigger flop was between Bottas and Albon? I'd say Bottas just because Albon got the better of him in qualifying, but then of course Albon retiring from the race.
Flop of the race.
Seb, do you want to be the deciding vote?
I think I'd go for Bottas just because obviously he finished behind his teammate, and Albon, it was no fault of his own. I think obviously he had a poor pit stop. And he had to come back in and then it ruined his race.
Poor pit stop. Nah, that's
no. I'm talking about
Williams.
Williams.
Crazy.
I'm talking about Williams. Alex.
Oh
Albon.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Obviously, they didn't put his right front on properly, so he had to come back in, and after that, it's just ruined. So, maybe if Albon had actually had the actual race, maybe he could have been the flop. But I probably think he probably would have finished ahead of Sargent. So I'm going to go for Bottas.
All right, well, that earns me the point then. This is slowly becoming a bit of a better showing from me predictions-wise than it was initially. But then we'll talk about the best team now. So this is, again, another one that's quite hard to predict usually. But you two both got it right with Ferrari. That's because I said Alpine, and that is linked to my shot prediction. I'll just get it out of the way. I thought maybe there could be some more points on the cards for Alpine here. Really tough track to overtake around is Imola, and it's a case of, say they got it right in qualifying, say there is some sort of master strategy, some sort of safety car that comes out, if they had that good bit of fortune that Imola can sort of throw up out of nowhere, then maybe some more points are on the cards. But no, for Alpine, Seb, you're the Alpine expert on the channel, really. Were points possible?
No, I don't think so. I think qualifying, Esteban got basically everything out of the car. Pierre, he actually, as I say this literally every single week, he had quicker pace than Esteban, sure. And then, final turn, he completely cocked it up. And then his race was ruined basically because of, blue flags, things like that. And Esteban, on the final stint, the Alpine just wasn't quick enough and he was getting overtaken left, right and centre. So, I think ultimately this weekend just wasn't their weekend. I think they'll be better in Monaco. But they just didn't have it this weekend.
I don't think even Ferrari, which what we and Seb went for, was even the team. I think it was McLaren, maybe.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Again, after obviously Miami, they went on and probably had team of the week again, because I thought Oscar and Lando were just so strong. And you can't even say Red Bull because of how much, Perez just flopped. So, yeah, I'd probably say McLaren, but out of Alpine and Ferrari, I reckon it's Ferrari.
Yeah, the best of a bad pairing there for you both. But that's a point each for the pair of you for saying Ferrari and not Alpine. I don't know what I was thinking, really. Maybe I was just sort of trying to hope for some excitement for Alpine, sort of at the bottom of the midfield. But then onto the shock prediction. We've got another correct shock prediction now. Seb, in the form of you saying a double RB Q3. Amy, I mean, you said Norris to win again. We nearly had two shock predictions in one.
I know.
And then mine, of course, being a bit of a letdown with Alpine scoring points. Obviously not happening. But yeah, Amy, yours was tantalisingly close. And Seb, yours came true. I mean, did you really think that would happen, or were you just sort of trying to pluck something out of thin air?
Well, I don't think it's the most shocking prediction ever, considering RB have had the pace to get into Q3 arguably every weekend. You've seen that through Yuki Tsunoda. It's just, the pair of them haven't been able to put it together at the right time. This weekend they actually were. Ricciardo still wasn't completely on it, I don't think, but they did enough to get into Q3. I don't think this is going to be like a very high point sort of shock prediction. I think it's like a 2 or 3 points, but I'm just happy it came true.
Yeah, for those of you new around here, we do give 1 point for each correct answer for every prediction, apart from the shock prediction. The sort of shocking factor is what determines how many points we award it for that. So say someone predicts, I don't know, Logan Sargent to win a race, they would get 100 points.
10.
100 points, 10, whatever. And then, with Seb's sort of rather tame double RB Q3, something that would be pretty hard to predict, but not exactly shocking, then we'll give it a few less points than a Logan Sargent race win.
In the prediction video, giving points to Sarah, I was saying I'd be quite shocked, because obviously, RB has always had more so a Yuki weekend, but it's always also been a Daniel weekend, but they've never actually had a good weekend together. Obviously in that quali they both got in it together, so I said I'd be quite shocked if that actually happened. So I feel like it'd be only fair to obviously the point for the prediction getting it right, and then the shock factor would probably give it 2 more, so overall 3. What do you think?
Yeah, you've got to take into account as well that getting into Q3 in the sort of, midfield is quite difficult, considering, Red Bull are usually guaranteed 2 spots in there. Same with Ferrari, same with McLaren. Mercedes, of course, should be pretty safe in Q3, as are Aston Martin. But of course, they took advantage of the fact that Sergio Perez and Fernando Alonso both had pretty poor weekends, and it is hard to anticipate the fact that, there will be a couple of spots available in Q3 for midfield teams. So I think that sort of adds to the shock factor as well. I'd say 3 points does sound about right for a double RB Q3, especially like you say, it's either one or the other of Tsunoda or Ricciardo that tends to perform in a race weekend as well. And given that Daniel Ricciardo hasn't been as electric as we thought he would be after the upgrades in China and that really strong race from him, so I'd say 3 points for the double RB Q3. So well done, Seb.
Are you happy with that? Do you want to dispute it?
No, I'm happy with that.
Okay, you're doing great that.
So I finished this race weekend with 4 points added to my total. I went into it with 27, and so that puts me on 31. Amy, you and I scoring the same points this weekend, so that puts you on 39. And then Seb, the strongest performer this weekend, with a whopping 6 points, taking him up to 27. So the race is on now. Seb, you have caught up significantly after a pretty poor start to the year.
I've got up to you, not to Amy.
yeah. Amy's just pulled away. Amy's been outrageously good the last few races. That's about it for our Imola review and prediction reaction. Make sure to tune in very soon for what we have to say about the upcoming Monaco Grand Prix this weekend. You're not going to want to miss that one, because there is so much to delve into. Thank you, Seb and Amy, once again for joining me on the channel, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.